This presentation outlines the defensive side of the Arizona versus Arias case. Travis Victor Alexander was found dead in his Mesa, Arizona home on June 9, 2008. Following a short investigation, his ex-girlfriend, Jody Ann Arias, was named prime suspect. She was indicted for the first-degree premeditated murder in July of 2008. And this is both pictures of Arias and Alexander during their time together, and this is Arias' mugshot.
So on the right of this photograph, we have the victim, Travis Victor Alexander, and to the left, Jody Arias. At the time of his death, Alexander was approximately 30 years old. He lived the majority of his life in Mesa, Arizona. He was known to his friends, family, co-workers, just about everybody that know him as a very devout Mormon. It was not unknown fact to hardly anybody. At the time of his death, he worked for prepaid legal services as a salesman. He also worked as a motivational speaker for the Mormon Church and for his job. Jody Ann Arias was born July 9th, 1980. So a little bit younger than Alexander, but not by much. Would have made her about 27 at the time. She was a native to California. She began working for prepaid legal services in late 2005, which is how she originally met Alexander and how they began their relationship. She was influenced by Alexander's beliefs and chose to be baptized into the Mormon Church shortly after meeting Travis. So this was a good bit before the incident in question. So on the right of
Major evidence for the prosecution included both physical and circumstantial evidence. The major physical evidence for the prosecution's case included photographs of the crime scene, Miss Arias' hair, Mr. Alexander's blood, and wounds found on Mr. Alexander's body. Photographs of the crime scene included the blood spatter that was found throughout the entire bathroom, as well as different images of Mr. Alexander's body as it was found by his close friends. Miss Arias' hair was also found in various areas around the bedroom and the bathroom of Mr. Alexander's residence. Alexander's blood obviously was found absolutely everywhere, even in the sink, which was adjacent from the shower where he was found. Wounds on Mr. Alexander included a gunshot wound just above his right eyebrow, a throat that was cut nearly from ear to ear, and 27 stab wounds in various areas of his body. And these are just various images that was taken from within Mr. Alexander's home. This shows the sink in question that was adjacent from the shower where Mr. Alexander was found, and there's also illustrations from his autopsy that shows where different injuries were found on his body.
our position, the defense had two very key pieces of evidence. On the top photo, you see professional Alice LaViolette, who was a professional in the studies of battered woman syndrome. We'll get into that in a moment. And on the bottom, you see Dr. Richard Samuels, who is most certainly our most sound argument and sound key of piece of evidence, if you will. Alice LaViolette, she explained to the court the symptoms of battered woman syndrome, and this also explained why Arias could not leave Alexander's abusive tendencies. As we recall, as earlier discussed, Alexander was said to be abusive. Well, most normal people, especially men, would ask, well, if Alexander was abusive, then why didn't Arias just leave? Well, Alice LaViolette goes into the details of explaining why she couldn't. The general rundown of it is when men abuse women, the women essentially feel trapped, like there's nowhere to go, like they're worthless, and that they need that man that is ironically breaking them down to build them back up, like they're important. It's a very vicious psychological cycle, which would explain why Arias could not physically or mentally leave Alexander. Dr. Richard Samuels accounts for the changing story in testimony from Arias. She had changed her story 2 or 3 times, which definitely raises a red flag to most people. Well, as discussed, Alexander was supposedly abusive, and had put her through very immense torment. And Dr. Samuels had conducted tests on Arias, and he said in his professional opinion that she did in fact have PTSD. Well, why is this important? This is important because people who suffer from PTSD tend to have gaps in memory. And due to the grilling nature of investigations, especially in a murder case, it's likely that Arias was grasping at straws, trying to give information that she didn't have, trying to connect dots that she didn't understand and that weren't necessarily there. Again, this is all due to the gaps in her memory from Alexander's abuse.
Courtroom etiquette is imperative to ensure that the courts and the trials run smoothly. One of the major things that is seen during a trial is obviously the questioning of witnesses. And these questions can go into 2 different realms, that is productive and unproductive questions. Productive questions aid in the presentation of evidence during trial. They're very clear. They allow a better understanding of the case and the argument that whatever attorney is trying to make. Unproductive questions do quite the opposite. They can be confusing, they can cause many issues, and they can make it harder for the judge and jury to come up with their reasoning behind why a defendant or whoever may be guilty or not guilty. Different types of unacceptable questions include leading questions, which could imply a different meaning than the attorney or the witness wanted to come across. Opinion or statement questionings can go 2 different ways. If they're interviewing an expert witness, these are considered okay because the expert has been ruled by the court as knowing what they are talking about, so they are allowed to give their opinion. However, non-expert witnesses or eyewitnesses are not allowed to give their opinion. They are only allowed to state fact. Multiple questions can lead to confusing the witness or confusing the judge and jury. All questions should be one at a time and cover one idea or subject matter at a time. Expert witnesses. In states, it is up to the judge to deem who is an expert witness. Just because they have a fancy degree in anything does not mean they could be considered an expert. In some matters, a judge is usually ill-suited to determine an individual's credentials. And most expert witnesses are paid for their time, so the witness is often likely giving a biased opinion in favor of the prosecution or defense. Eyewitness testimony. Very little is done to verify because it is basically going on the word of what somebody saw. It's like ulterior motives are rarely ever questioned, whether an eyewitness is testifying in favor of the prosecution to possibly get a lenient sentence because they were prosecuted for some other things as well. Oftentimes they're given third-hand testimony that include personal opinions or prejudice, and this is usually objectable, which can cause it to get thrown out. Courtroom limitations are lying under oath, which is punishable by jail time, fines, and probation, but it's very rarely pursued because it's such a small issue in the eyes of the court. In contempt of court, no disruption should be made by anyone other than the judge. This can also create some of the same punishments as lying under oath, but is very commonly seen in like courtroom dramas and things like that. And addressing the judge. When objecting, the judge should be addressed as Your Honor, and the judge will also respond with either sustained or overruled.
In conclusion to the entire trial. It began on July 9th, 2008. It's a very lengthy process, especially with changing testimonies, appeals. There was a lot to definitely be considered in this situation. A lot of investigation, a lot of examination of evidence. Following the lengthy trial, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and this came after 2 death penalty trials, both of which returned in hung juries. It is a requirement in the state of Arizona for a death penalty to be the majority. It cannot result in a hung jury. Everybody needs to agree that this person is deserving of the death penalty. So luckily, she skated by it both times. Arias is currently serving at a women's prison part of the Arizona Department of Corrections. A little bit after her life that we didn't put in the presentation, she has been painting and selling her story. A lot of her family uses a lot of that money to provide better food and amenities for Arias while she's in prison, and it has also been said that they will use some of that money to actually come visit her. So while she's in prison, it does seem like her family is still making an effort to come see her. She's possibly a little better off than most inmates, but as it sits right now, that's where she's at. She does have the options for more appeals, but she has been quoted as saying she's not sure if she wants to pursue more appeals or just to let everything go. Definitely makes one wonder, if you're innocent, why wouldn't you continue to appeal? And that's why most people would think. It's hard to understand how somebody operates when they're in confinement, but once you become comfortable, and especially with how grueling and intense the court system can be, it's very likely that her choosing not to appeal isn't her admitting guilt. She's just tired of fighting, at least for right now. We'll see what happens in the future. This is still a very recent case, but yeah, that would be it.